Welcome everybody. Great to share the space with you. For those of you who are new to ORT, we are an organization that supports entrepreneurs in the Jewish community through mentorship, networking, and training. If you'd like to know more, please connect with Brenna or myself. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from two successful entrepreneurs and Excel specialists, Dan Stillerman and Avi Levy. Dan and Avi will take us through an Excel training session covering key elements to improve our data analysis so we can make better business decisions. It is relationships like these that have enabled ORT to grow and become the organization it is today. Over to you, Dan.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lisa, and thank you for the partnership and the opportunity to present here this morning. We're very excited to get cracking. We want to dive into Excel as soon as possible, but just to let you know that this masterclass will actually be most effective if you work with us on Excel. Now, I know that might not be entirely possible and might not be that feasible for you right now. You might just want to watch this and then practice the Excel skills that we cover at a later stage, and that's perfectly okay. As Lisa mentioned, you would have seen that she started recording, and it's also streaming through on Facebook, so you will definitely have access to the recording, and that becomes really important because we're going to be covering quite a lot of content, and it might just be a little bit overwhelming at times. You might find yourself a little bit lost or confused because these skills may well be quite new to you, but practice is critical, and practice really makes permanent when it comes to Excel. Just like any skill, the more we practice, the more ingrained and fluent we become with those particular skills, and it starts to become second nature. So that's really what we're hoping to achieve here this morning, is to give you a lot of practical content that you can apply in your day-to-day work in Excel immediately, and also to hopefully excite you and inspire you to become more efficient and more confident, more productive when it comes to Excel, and more curious, so that you can start to discover more ways to work smarter. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to post a link into the chat over here. You can see it says, please download the Excel file and your complimentary cheat sheets using this link. Avi, I'm actually going to ask you if you can just post that on Facebook. You should have received a notification that you got tagged, so you should be able to find the live stream. There may well be a few people watching live or the recording on Facebook, so we want them to have the link as well. I see Howard Richmond has asked about Google Sheets. You absolutely can. There are pros and cons of working with Sheets. It's nice because it's live collaboration, but in terms of the functionality, a lot of it's similar to Excel, a lot of it's the same, but a lot of it is different. So we focus our training on Microsoft Excel, and Avi wants to add something.
Yeah, what I was just going to add is you can try follow along, but you might struggle because ultimately they're different applications. So you might gain a thing or two, but one's Google, one's Microsoft, so they are different. But you're more than welcome to try your luck.
Great. Thank you, Avi. I see Howard has given a thumbs up. So just to note that you do have reactions at the bottom. If you like something and something we show you during this training is a real aha moment, a real game changer for your work in Excel, then give us some love, give us a thumbs up so that we know. As we said, and you might have just joined us, I see there's about 5 or 10 people who have just joined in the last minute or two, so welcome to you. We have muted everybody by default, so you won't be able to unmute yourself. It will just become too chaotic and there'll be background noise, but we do want you to interact with us, and we do want to hear from you. So we're going to do that through the chat and the reactions. Anthony is wondering how to unzip the file. You will notice that it is a zipped file or zipped folder that you're going to download with that button on that link. It's a red button which says download your Excel file and the cheat sheets. You're going to get a complimentary keyboard shortcut cheat sheet, which is really useful, one for PC and one for Mac. There is a small chance that you are working on Excel for Mac. We find that about 95% of people in South Africa work on a Windows computer, and they're using Excel on a Windows computer, which is the better option and more user-friendly option when it comes to Excel, because Excel is obviously a Microsoft product. How do you unzip that file? You don't necessarily need to unzip it right now. You just open up the downloaded zipped folder and double click on the Excel file, and it should open up on your machine. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Avi in a moment because he's going to open up the Excel file and he's going to be driving and I'm going to be supporting. So Avi, over to you. Just before I hand over, in fact, Avi joined me in the business about 4 years ago. He's exceptionally passionate about Excel, and so much so that he sometimes puts himself into a spreadsheet, just as he's done there. He's exceptionally passionate about guitar and music as well. His non-virtual background has a whole bunch of guitars on the wall. He might show you if you're lucky. He might sing you an Excel song with his guitar if you're extra lucky. So with that, over to Avi.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks to you guys for joining in. Great to see that we have some awesome and excited looking faces over here. So yeah, let's dive straight in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. You're welcome to follow along. You're also welcome to half follow along and watch half, or watch the other half, and then you can kind of repeat or practice through the recording, which will be made available. So I'm going to share my Excel screen, and this is what mine looks like at the moment. A little bit weird. So the first thing that I notice is when I open up this file for the first time, it asks me if I want to enable editing. So I definitely do want to edit. So I'm going to click on enable editing. And there are two things that I want to do. And they're two tips that I love giving people when you are looking at a spreadsheet for the first time. Okay, not a blank spreadsheet, but when you're looking at a spreadsheet that has data in that you've never seen before, there are two things that I always recommend. The first thing is to save as. I'm sure many of you might know what that means. It's similar but different to a regular save in Excel. So what save as does is it will give you the ability to make sure that you know where it is being saved, because that's often a struggle where you'll save something, you'll save your work, and then you actually can't find it later. Secondly, the other benefit of saving as, you can also customize the file name. So for example, right now, this file name is not really unique or personal to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press F12. Now, this shortcut, along with many, many other shortcuts that we're going to be mentioning today, you'll be able to find on that PDF download of the cheat sheet. Okay, so we've made that available. It's in the same folder as this Excel file, and you're welcome to download it. You're welcome to print it. You'll see at the bottom, I think of page 1, or maybe at the bottom of page 2, it's double-sided. You'll see that there's a whole series of F key shortcuts. What are the F keys? They're at the top of your keyboard. Okay, sometimes you have to press FN plus the F key at the top, so you need to get familiar with your particular keyboard. So for example, I know that if you're on a Dell laptop, not to be confused with a Singer, Adele, but if you're on a Dell laptop, you often have to press FN plus the F key at the top. I'm going to press F12, and that's going to give me the ability to save as. Okay, you can see mine already is in the downloads folder, but I'm just going to make sure that it's in the downloads folder where I can find it later. And I'm also just going to customize the file name by putting my initials at the end of that file name. Okay, so I'm going to press enter. So now I've saved as, so I know for sure where it is, so I'll always be able to find it later. That's tip number 1 when you're looking at a spreadsheet you've never seen before. Tip 2 is just to orientate yourself with what's actually going on. Because what I've seen over the years in helping people in Excel is that often there's a mental barrier that really needs to be overcome before you get into the actual Excel stuff. So sometimes the mental barrier is that we're just a bit overwhelmed by what's going on and we're a bit confused and we're not so orientated. So I want to do a quick Excel orientation in general, and then an orientation to what type of data we are dealing with. And that's my second tip, to just orientate yourself with the data. So a quick Excel orientation, my Excel might look a little bit different to yours, but don't stress about that. There's 1 or 2 reasons that mine might look a little bit different. Firstly, I like hiding my ribbon. So I'm going to display my ribbon, and I'll tell you how I did it. You can see at the top of my screen, I've now displayed my ribbon. So the ribbon, and it's appropriately called a ribbon because it's kind of like a ribbon that's wrapped across the top of the Excel screen. It's this gray panel here. It's wrapped across the top like a ribbon. So this is where most of your buttons in Excel are to be found. And what you'll notice is that there are different tabs. So right now, the Home tab is selected, and there's a whole variety of options over here that relate to the Home tab. If I then go to the Insert tab, you'll notice that all of the buttons on the ribbon change, not just one or two of them. The whole ribbon changes. If I go to the next tab, etc., you'll see all the buttons change. So that's an important thing to note. I normally hide my ribbon. You don't have to have it displayed permanently. So how you hide it, and this is another tip that I want to give you guys. Excel has this built-in feature which is called a screen tip. Well, what is that? It's little hints and tips along the way while you're working in Excel. So for example, just as you hover over any button on the ribbon, check how cool this is. If you've never seen this before, this is very useful. If you hover over any button on the ribbon, a little white box comes up that's called a screen tip, and it gives you something tells you something useful about that button or about that command. Okay, so we're going to see this a few more times today. But what I wanted to show you now, in the bottom right-hand corner, when your ribbon is displayed, it will show me, it will give me a tip. It'll tell me what that little button does. In the bottom right-hand corner of the ribbon, it says collapse the ribbon. It even tells me if there's a shortcut. So you can see it says need a bit more space, collapse the ribbon so only the tab names show. So that's why I do it. I hide my ribbon to have a bit more space. I also use the shortcut that Excel has just taught us. So if I press Control and F1, my ribbon is hidden. Okay, I'm going to press Control F1 again. That will unhide it just so that my Excel environment looks a bit more familiar and normal to you. So now to finalize tip number 2, what I want to do is I just want to zoom in a little bit. Okay, how am I zooming in? There's a few ways to zoom in. How I'm zooming in right now is I'm holding down the Control button. So I'm holding down the Control button and I'm scrolling in or out with this little rolly ball on my mouse. You can see how it even works if my mouse is not on the table. So if I scroll in with the ball, it's zooming in. Can you see that? So I'm zooming in. So now we can see that we have a whole lot of columns, and just want to briefly take you through this. So you can see a whole lot of names. You can see progress, workshops. You can see Excel 101, Excel 202. There might be more as you scroll down. We can see sign-in count, last activity. We're going to discuss what these values are here in column E and column G. So basically what this data is, it's a progress report for our online workshops. Okay, we've removed email addresses, so you can only see people's names. So this is a export progress report for our online workshops. Okay, later on, we are going to auto fit the column width so that, for example, you might be wondering why you can't see the full names. We'll get to that in a bit. So we've got full names, we've got progress. This is actually percentage. We've got a whole list of different workshops that we offer. We've got sign-in count that tells us how many times each particular person has signed in. We then have the last activity. As I said, we're going to discuss this, but this is actually, maybe I'll ask you, does anyone know what type of data this is in column E and column G? Any ideas? Okay, I can see a few chats are coming through. Okay, great. Okay, Dean, correct. In column E and column G, those are dates. We're going to convert them into a date format very soon. And Neil is correct in terms of column F. Okay, so we're going to dive straight into it because obviously the core of what we're going to be focusing on today is pivot tables. So we don't want to spend too much time in the data, but we've just looked around. We hopefully are feeling comfortable and familiar with the type of data that we are dealing with. So the first thing we're going to do now, guys, if you are following along with me, what I want you to do is stand anywhere in your data. So click anywhere in your data. Make sure you're not outside of the data. You can see the difference between this is being outside the data, this is being inside. Okay, so stand anywhere in your data. And then what I want you to do is I want you to hold down the Control button and press the letter T. T for table. Okay, you'll notice that Excel picks up where your data is. Excel automatically picks up that your table does have headers. So all you need to do now, it's quite simple. You just had to press Control and T, and then I want you to press Enter. So all we've done is converted our data into a table. Now, this is not an absolute prerequisite. This is not an absolute prerequisite before you convert to a pivot table, but this is just a useful way to hold your data. Okay, we go into table mode in more detail in our Excel 202 workshop. That's not what we're focusing on here today. We're going to be getting very soon into pivot tables. So for now, though, we've easily and quickly converted our data into a table. Okay. So what I want to do now, I want to do one or two last things, and then we're going to get into the pivot table. What I'm going to do next is I want to auto fit the column widths, because I mentioned earlier, the column widths are not at their optimal width. So for example, the full names, most of them are cut off. So what we're going to do now, we're going to actually, for a change, we're going to do a mouse shortcut. Okay. Normally we show you keyboard shortcuts. So for now, I'm going to show you how to quickly auto fit the column widths using the mouse. So what are we going to do? Follow along. Can you see here in between column heading A and row heading 1, there's a little triangle. Okay, I'm going to click on that with my mouse, and that selects everything. Everything in Excel is now selected. All the columns, all the rows, and that's what we want. Then what we're going to do, we're going to move our mouse very carefully over that line in between column heading A and column heading B. You can see there's a line in between A and B. It would also work on the line in between B and C. It would work on any of these lines because I first selected everything. So I selected everything. And as I hover in between A and B, or B and C, C and D, etc., you'll see that that very unique mouse shape comes up now. You can see it's a cross with an arrow to the right and left. And as long as I see that shape when I'm between column heading A and B, or B and C, as I mentioned, all I now need to do is double click. So you can see what that did is it auto fitted the column widths based on my selection. Okay, I've zoomed out now a bit. I explained zooming in and out earlier. So what we're going to do now, I want to quickly format the data. Okay, it's important to format it because that is going to impact on the pivot table. So what am I going to do now, guys? I'm going to stand anywhere in the progress column. So anywhere in column B. So listen carefully. I don't have to be in any specific row as long as I'm somewhere in column B. Now what I'm going to do, and this keyboard shortcut is on your cheat sheet. Okay, I'm going to press Control and Spacebar. Control and Spacebar. Spacebar, that is where aliens go to drink. So I press Control and Spacebar, and now we're going to do a useful, I'm going to show you a great shortcut to convert to a percentage. Okay, why did we have to do Control Spacebar to select the column first? Because we want to select all of the values in the progress column before we format them. So now what we're going to do, there's a very easy to remember shortcut. If you want to convert to a percentage format, what you need to do is press Control and Shift and 5. Now, why 5? Because if you look at the top of your keyboard, you'll see that there is the percentage symbol on top of the number 5. So it's quite easy to remember. So if you press Control and Shift and 5, that easily and quickly converts the selected cells into a percentage format. Okay, again, easy to remember because it's the percentage symbol which is on top of the number 5. What we're going to do now, we're going to convert columns E and columns G into a date format. Okay, so what do? We're going to follow the same steps we did earlier. I'm going to stand anywhere in column E. It doesn't matter exactly where I am, anywhere in column E. And then I'm going to press, again, Control Spacebar. Okay, hopefully you remember it because of the joke, the place that aliens go to drink. Now what we're going to do, we're going to press Control Shift and 3. Okay, now it's not the number 3 on the right-hand side of your keyboard. That will not work. It has to be the numbers on top of your keyboard. So Control and Shift and 3 all at the same time will convert these selected cells into a date format. Okay, I'm now going to go into column G. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to press Control Spacebar again. I'm going a little bit quicker because this is the third time we're doing it. So I've pressed Control Spacebar in column G. I'm now again going to press Control Shift and 3 to convert to a date format. The final shortcut I want to do, and this is just converting these times into a time format. I'm going to stand anywhere in SAST, which is time. I'm going to stand anywhere in that column. I'm going to press Control Spacebar again. That selects all the values in that column. And in this case, I'm going to press Control Shift and 2. Again, the number 2 on the top of your keyboard, not the number 2 on the right-hand side of your keyboard. And again, reminder that all of these shortcuts that we've mentioned so far are on that PDF cheat sheet, which you're welcome to download and print. So what we've now done, we've just spent a little bit of time prepping our data for a pivot table. Okay, so very often it is important, and we go into this in quite a bit more detail in Excel 202 in terms of tidying up our data. You often have to tidy up your data before you can actually convert it to a pivot table. Because I'm now going to start explaining what a pivot table is, and that will emphasize why it's important to just spend a bit of time prepping your data, because kind of what you put in is what you're going to get out. So if you're putting in data that's a little bit messy, you're going to get a little bit of a messy outcome. So what is a pivot table? A nice way to explain it, and a simple way to explain it, is that it really is just a summarized version of a big data set. So very often you've got a big database, and in our case, if I jump to the bottom of this data, we haven't actually done this yet. There's a great shortcut. And again, all of these shortcuts are on that PDF download. If I press Control and the down arrow, I hold down Control, I press the down arrow, you'll see that jumps me down to the bottom of this data. So I can see that there are more than 7,000 rows of data, guys. That's a lot, 7,000. So right now, if we've got 7,000 rows of data, it's not so easy to really understand the bigger picture of what's going on with this data. So what a pivot table is going to help us to do is, in a quite a simple and easy way, you'll see it often is a bit of a mythical thing for people, or a bit of a scary thing when you talk of pivot tables. But we're going to show you now how it actually is relatively simple to use and very effective in taking a big data set and being able to summarize it to look for useful insights in the overall data set. So I'm going to jump back up to the top, Control and the up arrow. And now we're finally ready. What is very, very, very important, guys, is that when you start doing this with your data, whether it's in your personal life or whether it's at work, there's something so important that you have to remember. Your data has to have headers. When you're using a pivot table, you have to have headers. Okay, in general, it's a good tip anyway, because if this data didn't have headers, it just wouldn't look so good. But you have to have headers when you're converting to a pivot table. You don't have to be in table mode. That was just an added thing that we wanted to show you. But you do have to have headers. Okay, now all we're going to do, we're going to stand anywhere in the data. Now follow through. This is quite simple. There's literally just 2 steps that we need to do. We need to step and click anywhere in our data. Doesn't matter where you are, as long as you're somewhere inside of your data. We're then going to go to the Insert tab on the ribbon. Remember I spoke about the ribbon earlier. And by default, you'll most likely be on the Home tab. So please click on the next tab, one to the right of the Home, which says Insert. You'll see on the far left-hand side of the ribbon here, there is the Pivot Table button. What does it say? If I just look at the screen tip, as I mentioned earlier, Excel gives you these free tips. Easily arrange and summarize complex data in a pivot table. Okay, that's really all it is. You're summarizing complex data. Okay, so we're going to click on that button. Okay, so that's the second click we did. We clicked on the Insert tab at the top. We now clicked on the Pivot Table button. You don't have to change any of these settings here, guys. You can look at them if you want, but you're more than welcome to also just ignore them for now if you're new. Excel gives you the default settings where it picks up your database and it's going to insert your pivot table into a new sheet. All I'm going to do now is I'm going to click on OK. I didn't have to change anything. All I did is I stood in the data. I went up to the Insert tab. I clicked on Pivot Table, and now I'm going to click on OK. Okay. So now what has happened? You might be a bit confused because where did your data go? So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll notice that all that Excel did is that it inserted a new sheet. Okay, a quick bit of terminology in Excel. Very often you hear of a workbook, and sometimes you hear of a worksheet. So what's the difference? A book is a book. Okay. Here is a book. You see it's a very thick book. Dan brought it back for me very graciously when he was traveling overseas. He didn't realize it was this heavy. So this is a book, guys. A book is the overall document. So a workbook in Excel, that's the overall file. But inside of a book, you have many sheets. Okay. Many pages, which are also called sheets. Okay. So that's exactly the terminology in Excel. If you look at the bottom of your screen, these are the sheets that are within the book. So what I'm going to do now, it's very good practice, guys, is to rename your sheets. Okay, to me, I personally find it very amateurish when I see sheet 1, sheet 2, and there's a whole lot of sheets because it's not making the environment very user-friendly. So what am I going to do to rename the sheet? It's quite simple. You double click on where it says sheet 1. So I'm going to double click on sheet 1, and I'm just going to call that data. I'll press enter. I'm going to double click on sheet 2, and I'm going to call it pivot table. One word, by the way. Okay, then I'm going to press enter. Okay, so all Excel did is when we inserted the pivot table, it inserted a new sheet. So now we're in the pivot table sheet, which we've just renamed, and let's get started. So as I mentioned earlier, guys, Excel wants to help us. Okay, it's designed by a bunch of people that are obviously very clever, but they really have put in a big effort to make it user-friendly or as much as possible. So what do you see now? If you look on the left-hand side of your screen, this is what we call the pivot table placeholder. Meaning, this is where the pivot table is going to go. There's no pivot table yet. We need to build it. So we're just at the starting point. So on the left-hand side is the pivot table placeholder. This is the point in time where I like to use my annotation over here, and I'm going to draw you a quick little picture. So what you'll see, Excel says here, to build a report, choose fields from the pivot table field list. Okay, what does that mean? So if you look at the bottom over here, this is what our pivot table, that's going to be our pivot table. That's just kind of a little visual representation. But importantly, this picture over here, that represents this. Can you see it? Similar. Does that make sense? So this is the pivot table fields list. So Excel's telling you to choose fields from the pivot table field list. So that's all you need to do. To start building a pivot table report, you need to choose fields. Let me clear all of my drawings over here. So what do we need to do? So now we move to the right-hand side of our screen. We're looking at the pivot table fields list. We see a whole lot of fields. What are fields? Okay, it's a fancy word, but all they are the column headings. You might remember them from earlier. Full name, progress, workshop, signing count, last activity, SAST, member since. So Excel's given us our first tip. We just need to choose a field to start. Now, how do we choose a field? We just click on it. We click in that little tick box. So we're going to start off with workshops. If you are following along with me, I want you to click in that tick box which says workshop. Okay, I've clicked in that tick box which says workshop, and now we have built a pivot table. It's certainly not going to win any awards, but it is a pivot table, guys. Because what has it done? Let's take a closer look. It's taken workshop and it's ticked it. And where did it put it at the bottom? You can see at the bottom of the pivot table fields list, there are 4 areas. So there are 4 potential areas that you can put the fields into. So where did it, by default, so Excel just chose, it's quite intuitive, it put workshops into the rows area. So what has it now done is it's made the row labels for our pivot table the unique items from the workshop field. So if I go back to my data and I jump to the top, we chose workshop. So now what it's done in the pivot table, it only shows the unique items. So even though there's hundreds of 101s and 202s, and now for the first time, you might know that there's also 303, because it wasn't so obvious when you're looking at the data that there's actually also an Excel 303. Now what we can see, we already know something about this data that we didn't know. We now see that there are 3 unique Excel workshops that we offer. Okay, very easy to see that. Before, when there's 7,000 rows, it wasn't so obvious. I want to show you another way to actually move a field into one of those areas at the bottom. So check here, guys. It's also quite useful when you're building your pivot table. So what I'm going to do, you can also click and drag. What do I mean? If I want to, for example, remove workshop from the rows label, I'm going to click and drag and move it back into that area at the top. Can everyone see that little red X? Can you see the red X? That just means that it's going to remove it. So it's now removed it. We don't have a pivot table anymore. We're back at square one. So just to show you, you can either click on workshop or untick to remove it. You can also click and drag to insert a field into one of those areas at the bottom. So you can see it's very flexible, guys, meaning you also need to be able to move things around, because when you're building a pivot table, what's very important to realize, there's no exact right or wrong way to do it. It all depends on your data, and it all depends on, what are you looking for and what are you trying to achieve. So what we've achieved so far, we can see a summary of all of the workshops in this whole big 7,000 row database. Okay, so now what we've done, we've inserted workshop into rows. That is step one. Step two, we now want to insert typically something into the values area. In the bottom right, you can see there are 4 areas. As I mentioned, there are filters. Okay, we're not going to look at that for now. There are columns. Okay, which we're also not going to look at for now. There's rows. These would be your row headings. And then there is the values area. So typically, a value should always be a number. Okay. So what could we put out of these? Maybe you guys can give me some options in the chat here. What would you say is a good idea to put into the values area from these field list items? Okay. What do you guys think we should put into the values area? Okay. As I mentioned, it should be a number. Okay, so it could be progress, could be sign-in count, could be last activity, could be SAST, could be member since. Any guesses or suggestions? Anyone there? Okay, so let's put sign-in count and see what happens. Okay, I'm going to click on sign-in count. Again, you can see Excel's quite intuitive in terms of where it puts things. So I could have clicked and dragged on sign-in count into the values area, but you can also see if I just click on it, it puts it in there. So now what has it done? It's inserted a sum. It's added up all the sign-in counts. Okay, so you might want this in your data, but in this case, it's not the most useful insight telling us how many, although it kind of is, it's kind of interesting to see that we've had 90,000 sign-ins onto our platform, and that's quite a lot. But in this case, it's not exactly what we're looking for. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and drag a sum of sign-in count out. So I clicked and dragged it out, so it's gone. And what I'm going to rather do, I'm going to click and drag on progress. We want to get to a point where we can track the overall progress. That's quite useful to see what is the overall progress like. So I'm going to click and drag on progress, drag it all the way to the bottom right, and now it's in the values area. So now what do we see? We see a sum of all the progress. Okay. Now you might agree that this is still not such a useful insight into this data, because it's adding up all of the percentages. Now I'm sure you guys will agree. You don't have to be an actuary like Dan to know that adding up percentages is not really going to give you such a useful insight. Okay, you agree? Unless there's some crazy actuarial model where you add up percentages. I don't think that's what you'd ever want. So, but I then want to show you something very, very important in a pivot table. When you are in this values area, there are different types of calculations that you can do. So you most likely would want to sum, for example, guys, if you are building a pivot table and you've got lots of numbers in terms of, if you've got something that's a currency, for example, salaries, whatever it might be, sales figures, revenue. Okay, if you're dealing with something that's a currency, a rand amount, then you probably would want to sum it up. You want to see the total value of all the revenue, whatever it might be. But in this case, when it's percentage, we want to rather look at a different type of calculation. Anyone have any guesses as to what is a better calculation when you've got lots of percentages? So what's better than a sum when you are dealing with percentages? Any guesses? Okay, Shelley, great. 100%, you rather want to average them out. Okay, let's think of an example at school or university. So let's say you got a whole lot of students and you just want to see overall, what's the average mark for the whole class. Okay, so you've got all their percentages. You're not going to add them up. You're going to average them out. Dan, I think, wants to add something.
No, it's just applauding Shelley.
Oh, I wasn't sure if it was an applause or if it was a hand being raised. Okay, great. So guys, how do we do that then? It's relatively simple. Okay, so follow along with me here. You can see at the moment in the bottom right-hand corner of my screen, it says sum of progress. Can you see there's a little drop-down arrow there? I'm going to click on that little drop-down arrow. Okay, and I'm going to click on the first option from the bottom, which says value field settings. Okay, can you see that? This is the window we want to get to. I'm going to close this. I want to show you another way that we could have got there. So option 1 is to click on the drop-down list there next to where it says sum of progress and click on value field settings. What you could also click on, by the way, this is a common thing that happens when people are learning how to use a pivot table. They'll say to me, Avi, that pivot table fields list on the right-hand side is gone. Can you guys see on my screen that thing that is on the right-hand side here? It used to be here, it's gone. Any ideas why it's gone? Because you'll only see it when you are in your pivot table. Okay? You'll only see it when you're in your pivot table. Okay, we've got an intruder in the back there, so I'm going to stick on my virtual background. So that's very important, guys. You're only going to see this fields list when you are in your pivot table. If you're outside, you're not going to see it. So make sure that you click inside and then you will certainly see it. So now that we're in the pivot table, I wanted to show you another way to get to that value field settings. What you do, this is what Dan taught me. I didn't know this. You double click on sum of progress. You see here where this is the column heading. You click on sum of progress and that opens the value field settings. So now that we're in this window, I showed you 2 ways to get here. You can see it's quite simple. Currently, the sum option is highlighted. We need to change it to average. Okay, so we click on average, we click on OK, and now it's averaged out automatically. We didn't have to do any formulas or calculations. You can see it's quite amazing. It automatically has averaged out all of the percentages per workshop, but it's not formatted. So what are we going to do? There is a way to format it in a pivot tables setting, but I want to practice a shortcut again that we did earlier. So what we're going to do, we're going to use the mouse. Follow along with me. We're going to select all of these values. Okay, we'll select all of these percentages with the mouse. You can use the mouse, it's fine. So we're selecting all of these percentages, and we then again going to practice Control, Shift, and guys, easy to remember, number 5 has the percentage symbol on top. Control, Shift, and 5 will convert to a percentage format. Okay. So now our pivot table is getting a little bit more useful because we have a proper insight into the average progress and it's formatted properly across all 3 workshops. Okay. So you can see overall, over all workshops, the grand total average is 81%, which is not bad. You can see, and maybe I'll give you guys a preview. I don't want to overcomplicate things if you're very, very new to this. But when it comes to working with dates in a pivot table, you can have a lot of fun, but you can get a few gray hairs. So in our Excel 202 workshop, we spend a bit of time, and it's a whole section on its own, just understanding and appreciating dates in a pivot table. So I will give you a bit of a preview to that. So you would see, it's interesting to note that over the years, okay, so from 2016, 2017, 2018 to now, the progress overall has steadily increased on our workshops. That's because we set up a whole system and we give people support, etc. So I'm not going to go into that for now. What I do want to do is I wanted to spend a little bit of time appreciating how to format your pivot table to make it look a little bit nicer. Okay, so we're not going to add any more fields for now. As I mentioned, we could add in a date, but maybe we'll leave that for the last couple of minutes. So what we're going to do now, When and only when you're standing anywhere in your pivot table, guys, when and only when you're standing anywhere in your pivot table, you're going to see the Analyze and the Design tab on your ribbon. What do I mean? If you are outside of your pivot table, which means that right now, your pivot table from Excel's perspective kind of doesn't exist in a way, in terms of, you know, formatting it and building it. You're not going to see those two tabs at the top here on the ribbon. But when I go into my pivot table, when I click on it, you'll see that I've got these contextual tabs. These tabs will only come up in this specific context. See that there's the Analyze tab. We're going to come and look at one or two settings here in the next few minutes. But what I want to look at now is the Design tab. I just want to show you how to format your pivot table so that it looks nice. So what do we need to do? We're on the Design tab. You can see here, there's this group called the Pivot Table Styles. And in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see there's a button which will open up and give you the ability to see more styles. Okay, so I'm going to click on more. You can see now you've got a whole variety of styles to choose from. Okay, you can see there's light, and you can kind of just, what's quite cool is you can just hover over any of them to get a preview of what it will look like. Okay, you can then kind of find one which suits your needs. I'm going to maybe go with this one now. Brown pivot style dark 3. Okay, so now I have made it look a little bit nicer, okay, in terms of the formatting. I can also play around if I want to with banded rows, because if we quickly go back to our table earlier, the original table, you'll notice that the table, when you convert to a table, it's got these banded rows. It's just easier to look at. Okay, so in the pivot table, when you're on the contextual tab, on the design tab, you can also add banded rows if you want. One other useful formatting thing that I like showing people is very often when you're building a pivot table and you start building a dashboard, okay, meaning you can have a few different pivot tables next to each other. I often like showing people how to remove these Excel grid lines. What are those? You can see here in the actual Excel spreadsheet, you can actually remove these lines. Can you see all these vertical and horizontal lines? To me, that just looks a bit cleaner when you're building a dashboard, because you might often want to present with this, or you might want to have a meeting around it. So how do you do that? It's quite simple. You go up to the View tab on the ribbon. Okay, not Review, it's Review minus RE. It's just View over there. You're going to go to the View tab on the ribbon. You'll see there's a group here more or less in the middle. You can see grid lines is ticked. So I'm going to untick that. And I like doing that because it just makes the Excel, this Excel sheet a little bit cleaner, just a little bit less messy. Okay. So that's another tip that I like giving, especially when you're building a pivot table. The next thing I want to look at is a very useful feature in pivot tables, which is called a pivot table slicer. Okay, now what is a slicer? Okay, very often you hear people talking about slicing and dicing their data. So this is literally slicing your data. What is a slicer? I don't even have to explain to you myself, because I'll let Excel explain. So where do I find this slicer button? Again, I make sure that I've clicked on the pivot table. I'm on the Analyze tab. You can see here more or less in the middle to the left, there's a button there which says Insert Slicer. So let's hover over that button to see the screen tip that Excel gives us. So what does it say? Use a slicer to filter data visually. So it's a visual filter. Okay, you'll see what I mean now when we do it. Okay, sometimes I over-explain things. It's actually simpler when you see it and when you do it. Okay, a nice analogy that I like giving to express that point quite nicely. Excel's a very hands-on practical skill, guys. So, you know, we can talk about it and talk about it and talk about it, but you're really only going to get it properly when you do it. Okay, it's like learning to ride a bicycle. You know, you can sit in a classroom and talk about it and theorize about it. You're only really going to appreciate and learn how to ride a bicycle when you get on the bicycle. So my tip also in terms of getting better and better and better in Excel, this might be the starting point for a lot of you and you really want to get better, is you really need to use it. You need to practice. You need to get your hands dirty. So that's quite important. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to click on that slicer button. So now Excel's asking me which field item, again, the field items, those were those column headings. Which one do I want to use as my slicer, my visual filter? Okay, so what we'll do in this case, we'll just click workshop again because we don't have too many options to choose from here. So we're going to click on workshop. I will just show you out of interest what happens if I tick full name. I'm going to tick full name and I'm going to tick workshop. I'm going to say okay. So now what you can see is these two boxes came up. Okay, so these are the slices. Okay, what you'll notice is a few important things. You can move them around quite easily. You can resize them. You can make them bigger or smaller. You can see for this one, there's quite a lot of random white space, so I'll make it a little bit smaller. And now, as I mentioned, this is a visual filter. So for example, guys, if I want to just see Excel 202, I click on Excel 202 on the visual filter, and now it's filtered the pivot table to only show Excel 202 based on this slicer over here. You can see it's just this easier, more intuitive, user-friendly way to filter your data. Okay, so now we can just see Excel 202. I'm going to clear the filter. You can see the button over there, the little filter with the X. Okay, and just to show you this other filter, the full name, it's obviously a very long list because it's now got all the names. But you can see, let's say I just want to see I just want to see Miri. How's Miri doing? So I click on Miri and it'll show me that she's done Excel 101 and she got to 100%. Fantastic. Okay, pretty cool. I'll clear the filter there. So what you're starting to notice is you can also start building these interactive dashboards in Excel. So we do go into this in a bit more detail in Excel 202, showing you how to add multiple pivot tables. So you can have another pivot table here and over here and over here, and then you can have multiple slices, and you can really create an interactive dashboard. The final thing that I want to look at today, just to recap before we go into the final thing, what have we done? We looked at converting our data into a table. That was here. As I mentioned, you don't have to do this, but it's just a great way to hold your data in general. Okay, we did a bit of formatting. We learned some shortcuts. We then inserted the pivot table. We then put we put workshop into the rows area. We put progress into the values area. We then looked at how to make an average. We then looked at formatting it as a percentage. We formatted the pivot table in the design tab. We've then inserted two slices. The final thing I want to look at is inserting a pivot chart. Okay, so I'm sure many of you have heard of a chart before in Excel. Okay, a chart is really, again, just another way to visualize your data. So again, instead of maybe talking about it too much, let's do it. And let's see how simple it is to insert a pivot chart. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to make a bit more space. So I'm going to move full name over there. I'm going to move workshop over there. And what am I going to do? Again, as I mentioned earlier, if you want to change a setting or you want to do anything that relates to your pivot table, you have to click in the pivot table first. So I'm outside over here. Okay. Even if I've clicked on a slicer, I'm still not in the pivot table. So I need to click on the pivot table. I'm then going to go up onto the Analyze tab on the ribbon. Okay. And what you'll notice is there's a button over here which says Pivot Chart. Okay. So it's exactly like a normal chart in Excel. The benefit, though, is that it's linked to your pivot table. Now, the benefit of inserting a pivot chart as opposed to a normal chart is, I'll show you quickly what I mean. If I go into my big database over here, guys, I've got more than 7,000 rows. I'm going to go up to the Insert tab. Now, you don't have to follow along. I'm just illustrating a point here. I'm going to go up to the Insert tab, and this is how you would insert a normal chart in Excel. I'm going to click on Recommended Charts. I'm just going to say, okay. Going to take a bit of time. Don't try this at home. Excel's not responding. Hopefully it will come come right soon. So what I'm illustrating is that if you link a chart to a massive database, it's going to be totally nonsensical. Look at Dan's emoji over there. Because the whole point of a chart is that it needs to be linked to a summary of your data first. So again, this is not what I want you to do. I'm going to delete this. If you try to link a chart to a massive database, you're going to end up with something that's totally nonsensical. So it's generally better anyway to first summarize it, as we've done with a pivot table, and then to go up to the Analyze tab, to then click on Pivot Chart. We're just going to go, you can see we can change the different, we can choose a different type of column if we want. I'm just going to go with the first one that Excel recommends. You can even see how I could have clicked on recommended if I wanted to. But let's not go there. Let's just click on Pivot Chart. So what did I do? I click in the pivot table. I go up to the Analyze tab on the ribbon. I then click on Pivot Chart. I'm just going to go with that first option. It's column, clustered column. Okay. I can now move it to the right-hand side over here. And now what we have is a chart that's linked. We're celebrating there. Great emoji there, Dan. We linked our chart to a summary of the data. I'm sure you will agree that this chart looks a lot better than that random weird chart that I made earlier, because now we can see that overall the progress is best on 101. Okay, a little bit lower on 202, a little bit lower on 303. Okay, we're not going to really go into too much detail, but I'll show you one or two useful settings when you are building a chart. So again, what's so useful in Excel, guys, is that you very often have these contextual tabs that come up on the ribbon. So for example, if I go back to my data, we didn't really discuss this much, but when I'm in a table, first thing we learned today, when I'm in a table, you'll see that there is the Table Design tab. It's a contextual tab that will relate to this specific table that I've inserted. Again, I'll show you if I'm outside of the table, there's nothing there. When I'm inside the table, the Design tab comes up. I can then change the style if I want. Okay, very useful. So now when we go to our pivot table and I click on the chart, you can now see there's a whole variety of options in the contextual tabs that come up just for the chart. You can see that there's the Analyze tab. Okay. There's the Design tab where you can change the chart style if you want. This is quite useful. So you can see here, I can make it look a little bit fancier with a bit of silver over there. Okay. I can change the formatting of it. Okay. I'm not going to go into detail in this. But it's useful to note that, as always in Excel, there, when you're building a pivot table, there's the contextual tab. When you've got your slicer, there's also a slicer contextual tab. When you've got your chart, there's a contextual tab over here. So we take a step back now. I think we can appreciate that we've built a relatively simple, but a nice, useful dashboard, just showing us a few useful insights into this data. Okay. What I maybe want to show you guys, and this last little bit might not be for everyone. I don't want to bamboozle or confuse you, but I just want to show you, because I see we've still got 1 or 2 minutes. I want to show you what it looks like when you work with dates in a pivot table. Okay. So if you get confused with this, it's fine. You can ignore it. But if you have an appetite for something a little bit more, I'm just going to show you what it looks like when you insert a date into a pivot table. So what am I going to do? I'm going to take the last activity column. Okay, that's a date. I'm going to move last activity into the columns area. Okay. So what it did is it first inserted all of those individual dates. I'll show you what it looked like originally. Give me a sec. This is often what happens when you insert dates into a pivot table. Okay, it'll be a big mess, because you can see it's inserted each of the individual dates from our database as a column heading. Now that's just too busy. So what Excel automatically did for me there earlier, and what you can do in a very relatively simple way, and we go into this in quite a bit of detail in Excel 202, is as follows. You click on any one of these dates, you go up to the Analyze tab, and you can see there's a button here which says Group Field. It's a very important feature when working with dates in a pivot table. You can group them. What does that mean? You can take a whole lot of dates and group them into something like a month or a year. So it's more of a summary. So I'm going to click on Group Field, and I'm just going to click on months, and I'm going to click on years. Or let me even just click on years. I want to just group all of these dates from 2016 to now into years. So I'm going to click on OK. Now what you can see is something that's a bit more, just a lot easier to understand. So what are we now looking at? I'm going to just lay these out a bit better. And again, if you found that little section on date a bit confusing, it's fine. But I think some of you will appreciate that's a very useful thing to know, because very often we are dealing with dates in our data. So what you can now see is as follows. We've got these date headings here, which I created. I created these groups as years, and we can now see all the percentages. So now it's very useful to notice as follows. If I'm now, okay, a business owner, and I'm looking at this business, I can now see something quite useful in this particular business. Okay. And I can see it actually quite easily in this chart. So if I look at the chart, you can see we've got Excel 101, Excel 202, Excel 303, and you'll see over the years how the progress has got better and better and better. So as we mentioned at the start of this this crash course, this masterclass, you know, we want to show you how we can empower you to make business decisions through building a dashboard. So now we can see, for example, that something is working, because our progress on our online workshops is getting better and better. Okay. We can ask the question as to why. Okay. We know it's because we've created a whole system around our online workshops where there's support, there's a start date, there's an end date, there's a whole lot of incentives, there's a whole structure, there's a whole system. So you can see that through building a pivot table and inserting some slices and inserting a chart and changing a few settings, you can see so much more of what's going on in this business than the original database, this original data showed us. Because you agree, this data didn't really show us much, didn't give us much of an insight into what's going on in the business. So this is our dashboard. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. It's now 9:29, so we did very well for time. I know that Lisa's going to wrap up, and I know that Dan also maybe is just going to tell us about some very awesome and exciting specials and discounts that we're offering just for you guys off our full online workshops. So that's it from me. Hope you guys have enjoyed. Dan asked, what was your biggest takeaway? So you're welcome to post in the chat. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to thank you guys. I hope you've enjoyed. And yeah, hope to see you guys again. If you feel like you want to and it's going to add value, we hope that you'll appreciate the special discount offer that we're giving just to you guys off our online workshops. So, take care and stay safe.
Fantastic. Thank you, Avi. I think as you can see, Avi is exceptionally passionate and brilliant when it comes to Excel, and I trust that he added a lot of value this morning. And hopefully you'll practice this and you'll start implementing these skills into your day-to-day lives immediately. So Dean says pivots are very powerful. A. Shorkin says many thanks, shortcuts. Sol says no need to fear Excel. Absolutely. And Dean Sanders says shortcuts for me saves time. So that's fantastic. I'm going to hand over to Lisa in a couple of moments. Lisa, have we got 1 or 2 minutes just to mention the special offer for ORT Cape Town?
Sure.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Lisa. So guys, I'm gonna post the link, the same link once again into the chat. And I'm gonna click on that link because I want to show you what happens when you go there. We've included a button. Let's move this out the way. This green button over here says click here to unlock 80% off all our online courses. And this is the code to use. Avi has been mentioning a couple of times through the course of this masterclass, the fact that we've got our workshops, and obviously the data that we actually used was the progress on our training. As you could see, we've got 3 workshop levels, Excel 101, 202, and 303, where we really deep dive into the skills that are going to really move the needle in terms of your confidence and productivity. 101 is really the foundation. We look at the building blocks of formulas and functions. We look at a whole lot more keyboard shortcuts and formatting and protecting your work. It's really by no means just simply for beginners or babies. It really is a great foundational workshop. Then 202, we look at advanced data analysis. A lot of the skills that we cover today fall into 202, together with VLOOKUP and more advanced formulas and functions, and a whole lot more on pivot tables and pivot charts. And then 303 is covering macros and VBA, so automating repetitive tasks through the use of macros and VBA. If we click on this button, what you'll see is it takes you to our plans and pricing page. The standard discount at the moment for November is 60%, but for you guys, we are offering an additional 20% off. So it's 80% of all our online courses. And instead of using this code, you just type in ORTJET CT. So for example, Excel Unilite includes 101 and 202. And if you click here, the full price on our site is $500. But if you type in ORTJET CT, it's not case sensitive, and you just click apply, then it discounts it by 80%. So you'll get both courses for $100. Put in your details there, and you'll actually get immediate access and lifetime access, which is really nice because you're not pressurized to finish it within a couple of weeks or a month. You can take your time and actually complete it in your own time and at your own pace. We also can talk to you privately offline about training for your company or your team if that's relevant, because we can onboard your team all in one go and provide structure and support. As Avi was mentioning, one of the reasons that our progress has improved over the years is because we provide a lot of structure and support. We provide a start date and an end date and a WhatsApp group. So we really do take our support very seriously, and ensuring that there's accountability and return on investment in the training. So yeah, get in touch with us if you would like to talk about training for your team. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Let's see what's in the chat. I also want to mention that it would be great to stay in touch. So let's connect. Avi will post our LinkedIn profile links into the chat. So please drop us a connection request on LinkedIn. It would be great to keep in touch there. And yeah, it really has been great. It's been a privilege to be here with you this morning. We've had a lot of fun. So yeah, a huge thank you to all of you for enrolling and showing up to this. And once again, take advantage of the fact that this session has been recorded. And again, a big thank you to Lisa for the opportunity. So yeah, that's all from me for now. Lisa, back to you.
Thanks, Dan. Just a quick one, just to say thank you really to Avi and Dan for giving of your time, sharing your enthusiasm with the numbers and Excel and the many insights that you have shared with us. I can see from the chat box that everyone definitely gained valuable gems, especially with your shortcuts, and in how Avi really very clearly and concisely shared how to create pivot tables and get the benefits out of them. So although I might find it somewhat overwhelming, as you said, it's best to get into it and practice and just try and make it work. So thanks so much. Really, really appreciate you and the Excel Academy in providing this, this forum for us. And then to everyone who has joined us this morning, thank you for joining us. Hope you gained what you were expecting. I will be sending the recording to everyone tomorrow, so you can always check in with that to refer to information if you're not so clear. And yeah, just everyone stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar, which will be in a couple of weeks, where Ronnie Aptierker will be interviewing Pippa Ehrlich, the director of My Octopus Teacher. So keep safe and thank you, and chat to you soon.